Margaret Whitmore's manicured finger trembled as she dialed 911, her voice sharp with indignation. Someone's destroyed my pool, vandalized it with graffiti. Behind her pristine kitchen window, security cameras rolled silently, capturing every damning frame. What she didn't know was that those same cameras had been recording for hours, and the truth they held would shatter everything she thought she knew about her own family. Sometimes the person you're looking for is closer than you think. Sometimes they're sitting at your breakfast table. Margaret Whitmore stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug suspended halfway to her lips, staring at the abomination that had once been her pristine backyard oasis. The infinity pool that had cost $47,000, she knew the exact figure because she'd argued with Harold about it for 3 months, was now a canvas of crude black spray paint. Rich pigs stretched across the pool's limestone, coping in jagged letters. Below it, someone had added "Eat the Wealthy" in smaller script, as if the vandal had run out of steam or paint. Margaret's hand shook as she set down the mug, the delicate china clattering against the marble countertop. "Harold." Her voice echoed through the McMansion's vaulted ceilings. "Harold, get down here right now." Footsteps thundered down the curved staircase. Her husband appeared in the kitchen doorway, still adjusting his tie for another day at the investment firm. At 52, Harold Whitmore looked every inch the suburban success story: silver at his temples, golf tan, teeth straightened by adult orthodontic. "What's all the—" He stopped mid-sentence as Margaret pointed toward the window. The color drained from his face. "Jesus Christ." "Don't blaspheme," Margaret snapped automatically, though her own faith had become more of a social accessory than a genuine belief. "Look at it. Just look at what they've done to our home." Harold moved to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the morning light. Beyond the glass, their half-acre of professionally landscaped perfection had been violated. The pool area, with its travertine decking and hand-selected river stones, looked like a crime scene. "Kids," he muttered. "Has to be kids from the public school. Probably that Ramirez family. I knew we should have fought harder against that affordable housing development." Margaret was already reaching for her phone. "I'm calling the police. And our security company. How did this happen? We have cameras. Everywhere." "Maybe they knew where the blind spots were," Harold suggested, loosening his tie. He'd have to call in late to work, deal with insurance, contractors, the whole mess. Or maybe the cameras caught something. As Margaret dialed 911, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the second-floor landing. Tyler Whitmore, 17 and sharp-angled with adolescent fury, pressed himself against the wall as his mother's voice carried up the stairs. "Yes, this is Margaret Whitmore at 1247 Thornwood Drive. I need to report vandalism, extensive property damage to our pool area." Tyler's heart hammered against his ribs. His black hoodie still smelled faintly of spray paint, and there was a telltale smudge of black on his right index finger that he hadn't noticed until this moment. He rubbed it frantically against his jeans, but the stain had already set. "No. We didn't see who did it," Margaret continued. "We discovered it this morning. Yes, we have security cameras. I'm sure they captured everything." The irony wasn't lost on Tyler. Those cameras had indeed captured everything. Every stroke of paint. Every letter carefully formed in the pre-dawn darkness while his parents slept soundly in their California king bed. He'd been methodical about it, even artistic in his own way. The words had poured out of him like a confession he'd been holding back for years. "They want to send an officer out immediately," Margaret announced to Harold, hanging up the phone. "And I'm calling that security company. We pay them enough. They better have some answers." Tyler crept back to his room, closing the door with exaggerated care. His bedroom was a study in expensive neglect, gaming setup that cost more than most people's cars, closet full of designer clothes he'd never asked for, and walls covered with college pennants from schools his parents had already chosen for him. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, places where Whitmores were supposed to go. He'd been accepted to 3 state schools and 1 small liberal arts college that actually excited him, but his parents had dismissed those options without discussion. "We didn't work this hard so you could waste your potential," his mother had said. The state schools were for other people's children. Through his window, Tyler could see his handiwork more clearly. The morning sun hit the spray paint at just the right angle, making the words seem to pulse with life. He felt a mixture of pride and terror that made his stomach churn. His phone buzzed. A text from his girlfriend, Jess. "You actually did it, didn't you?" Tyler had told her about his plan 3 days ago, during one of their late-night conversations about inequality and privilege. Jess attended the public school that Harold had mentioned with such disdain. Her father worked 2 jobs to keep their family afloat, and she'd watched Tyler's parents write checks for charity galas while complaining about property taxes that funded the school district. "I can't prove anything," Tyler texted back, but even as he typed it, he knew the cameras would prove everything. Downstairs, the doorbell rang. Tyler heard his mother's voice, pitched higher with stress and indignation, greeting the responding officer. Then came the sound of multiple footsteps heading toward the backyard. "Officer Martinez, thank you for coming so quickly," Margaret's voice carried through the house. "As you can see, this is extensive damage. We are talking thousands of dollars in cleanup and repairs." Tyler crept to his window again. Below, he could see his mother gesturing dramatically at the pool while a young police officer took notes. His father stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back in his best boardroom posture. "Have you had any issues with neighbors? Any recent disputes?" Officer Martinez asked. "Nothing specific," Harold replied. "But there's been talk at the Homeowners Association meetings about the demographic changes in the area since they built that development on Maple Street." The racist undertones weren't lost on Officer Martinez, whose own family lived in the development Harold was referencing. But he kept his expression neutral, professional. "We'll need to check your security footage. When can you have it ready for review?" Margaret's face lit up with vindictive satisfaction. "Right away. We have cameras covering every angle of the property. Whoever did this will be on video, guaranteed." Tyler felt the walls of his privileged world closing in. In a few hours, maybe less, his parents would be sitting in their home office watching their son destroy their property while spray painting accusations about their wealth and privilege. The cameras would show everything: his face clearly visible under the security lights, his methodical approach to the vandalism, the way he'd stood back to admire his work. But more than that, the footage would show the hours of planning, the way he'd tested the spray paint on a piece of cardboard first, the careful spacing of the letters. This wasn't a moment of teenage rebellion. It was a calculated statement. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a group text from 3 of his classmates at the private academy he attended. "Dude, someone hit the Whitmore place. It's all over social media." Tyler's blood turned to ice water. He opened Instagram and found the posts immediately. Someone had already taken photos of his work and posted them with captions like "Eat the Rich Strikes Again." And finally someone said it. The images were spreading, being shared and reshared across platforms. One post caught his attention. It was from Madison Chen, a girl from his AP history class whose parents were almost as wealthy as his own. "Whoever did this is my hero. The Whitmores act like they own the whole neighborhood." Tyler stared at the screen, watching the likes and comments multiply in real time. His anonymous act of rebellion was becoming a social media phenomenon, and he was trapped in the center of it, unable to claim credit or distance himself from the consequences. A knock at his bedroom door made him jump. "Tyler." His mother's voice, sharp with stress. "Come downstairs. The police officer wants to speak with the whole family." Tyler's throat went dry. Why would he want to talk to me? Standard procedure. Margaret replied, but there was something else in her voice now. Suspicion. "Just come down. And wash your hands. You look like you've been working on that car engine again." Tyler looked down at his hands and felt his world tilt. The spray paint stain on his finger seemed to glow like a neon sign. He rubbed at it desperately, but it had bonded with his skin. "Tyler." Margaret's voice was closer now, right outside his door. "Coming, Mom," he managed, his voice cracking like he was 13 again. As he walked toward his bedroom door, Tyler caught his reflection in the mirror above his dresser. He looked guilty as hell, pale, wide-eyed, with the telltale stain on his finger and the smell of spray paint still clinging to his clothes. But it was more than that. For the first time in his 17 years, he looked like someone who had done something that mattered, something real. Even if it was about to destroy everything he'd ever known about his family and himself. He opened the door to find his mother waiting in the hallway, her perfect composure starting to crack around the edges. Behind her, he could hear Officer Martinez's. The booking process at the Juvenile Detention Center was a masterclass in institutional humiliation. Tyler's designer jeans and $100 sneakers marked him as an outsider among the other detainees, most of whom looked at him with a mixture of confusion and contempt. "First time?" asked the intake officer, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes who'd probably processed thousands of kids like Tyler, though maybe not exactly like Tyler. "Yes, Vandalism, it says here. Your own family's property." She looked up from her paperwork with genuine curiosity. "That's a new one." Tyler nodded, still feeling the phantom weight of the handcuffs. The reality of his situation was settling in like cold water. This wasn't a movie or a social media post. This was actual jail, with actual consequences. "Phone call?" the officer asked. Tyler almost laughed. Who would he call? His parents had watched him get arrested. His girlfriend Jess was probably in AP chemistry right now, completely unaware that her boyfriend was being processed into the juvenile justice system. His few close friends attended the same private academy where news of his arrest would spread. Like wildfire within hours. "I guess, my parents." The officer handed him a phone with a pitying look that suggested she'd seen this particular tragedy before. Privileged kids whose families fell apart under pressure. Harold answered on the first ring. "Tyler." "Dad." Tyler gripped the phone tighter than necessary. I'm in jail." "I know. Your mother and I are meeting with Jonathan Rivers right now. He's the best criminal defense attorney in the county." Criminal defense attorney. The words hit Tyler like physical blows. This morning he'd been a high school senior with college. Acceptance letters. Now he was someone who needed a criminal defense attorney. "Dad, is Mom? Your mother is devastated." Tyler. "Absolutely devastated. Do you have any idea what you've done? Not just to the pool, but to our family? To our reputation?" Through the phone, Tyler could hear muffled voices in the background. His mother's sharp tones, probably giving instructions to the lawyer. The sound of someone typing rapidly on a laptop. "The story is already online," Harold continued. "Someone leaked it to the local news. Privileged teen vandalizes own family home. They're using words like entitled and spoiled. Your mother can barely leave the house." Tyler felt a stab of something that might have been guilt, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger. "Maybe. If you actually listened to what I was trying to say, what you were trying to say. Tyler, you spray painted our pool. That's not communication, that's destruction. It's the only thing that got your attention." The line went quiet. Tyler could hear his father breathing, could imagine him in the lawyer's office with his loosened tie and his carefully controlled panic. "Rivers says he can probably get the charges reduced to a misdemeanor if you plead guilty and agree to community service," Harold said finally. "But your mother. Tyler, your mother wants to make an example of you." "What does that mean?" "It means she thinks you need to face the full consequences of your actions. No plea bargains, no family connections, no pulling strings. She wants you to go through the system like any other kid who vandalized someone's property." Tyler closed his eyes. He'd wanted authenticity, wanted to break through the protective bubble of privilege that surrounded his family. Apparently, he'd succeeded beyond his wildest imagination. "How long?" he asked. "Rivers thinks maybe 30 days in juvenile detention, plus probation and restitution. But Tyler, that's if we can keep it in juvenile court. If the prosecutor decides to try you as an adult." The implication hung between them like a sword. Adult court meant adult consequences, adult records, adult implications for college and careers and the rest of his life. "I have to go," Tyler said. "They're only giving me 5 minutes." Tyler, "Wait. Your mother. Despite everything, she loves you. We both do. But right now, she can't see past what you've done. She feels betrayed." Tyler thought about his mother's face in the kitchen. The way she'd looked at him like he was a stranger. "Tell her I said I'm sorry she feels betrayed. But I'm not sorry I told the truth." He hung up before his father could respond. Back in the holding area, Tyler found himself seated next to a kid about his own age with facial tattoos and the kind of hard eyes that came from seeing too much too young. "What you in for, prep school?" the kid asked, not unkindly. "Vandalism." "What did you hit?" "School." "Mall." Tyler felt heat rise in his cheeks. "My parents' house." The kid stared at him for a long moment, then burst out laughing. No shit. You tagged your own crib. Yeah. Damn. The kid looked at Tyler with something approaching respect. That's either the stupidest thing I ever heard or the most gangster. What did you write? Called them rich pigs. And they pressed charges. The kid's expression shifted to disbelief. Your own parents. Tyler nodded. Shit, man. That's cold. My mom's bailed me out 3 times this year, and I actually did steal that car they said I stole. The conversation was interrupted by a corrections officer calling Tyler's name. Whitmore, you made bail. Tyler felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Part of him had been curious about what would happen if he stayed, if he actually followed through on facing consequences without his family's intervention. In the lobby, he found Harold waiting alone. His father looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 6 hours, tie completely undone, hair disheveled, the careful composure of successful suburban manhood completely shattered. Where's Mom? Tyler asked. Home. She's having a hard time with this. They drove in silence through the familiar streets of their neighborhood. Tyler noticed things he'd never seen before, the way the houses got progressively larger as they approached their street, the subtle markers of wealth that separated their enclave from the rest of the world. Even the streetlights looked more expensive. As they pulled into their driveway, Tyler saw something that made his stomach drop. News vans. 3 of them, lined up along the street like predators waiting for prey. Jesus, Harold muttered. I was hoping they'd give up and leave. The reporters spotted their car immediately. Cameras swung in their direction, and Tyler could see people grabbing microphones and adjusting equipment. Head down, Harold instructed. Don't say anything. Don't even look at them. But as they hurried toward the front door, Tyler heard the questions being shouted. Tyler, do you regret vandalizing your family's property? Are you planning to sue your parents for having you arrested? What message were you trying to send? Inside the house, Margaret was pacing the living room like a caged animal. She looked up when they entered, and Tyler saw that she'd been crying. Her perfect makeup was smudged, her usually immaculate hair showing signs of nervous pulling. They won't leave, she said without preamble. The reporters. They keep knocking on the door, asking questions. Mrs. Henderson from next door called to ask if it was true that our son is a vandal. A vandal, Tyler. That's how the neighbors see you now. Margaret, Harold said gently, maybe we should all sit down and sit down. Margaret's voice pitched higher. Do you know what I've been doing while you were bailing out our criminal son? I've been on the phone with the country club, the charity board, the PTA. Everyone wants to know if the stories are true. Everyone wants to know how we raised such an ungrateful child. Tyler found his voice. Maybe they should be asking why. You pressed charges against your own son for telling the truth. Margaret spun to face him, her eyes blazing. The truth? The truth is that you're a spoiled brat who destroyed property because you didn't get enough attention. The truth is that you've humiliated your family because you think it makes you some kind of revolutionary. The truth is that we live in a $47,000 pool while complaining about taxes that fund public schools. The truth is that you write checks to charity so you can feel good about yourselves while looking down on everyone who isn't as rich as we are. We worked for what we have. Margaret shouted. Your father and I built this life from nothing. And then you built a wall around it. You built a wall around us. Do you even know what my friends' names are? Do you know anything about my life that isn't about college applications and resume building? Harold stepped between them, hands raised. Stop. Both of you, just stop. This isn't helping anyone. But Tyler wasn't finished. The months of resentment were pouring out of him like water through a broken dam. You want to know why I spray painted the pool? Because it was the only way to make you see me. The real me, not the Harvard-bound robot you've been trying to create. Margaret's face crumpled. For a moment, she looked genuinely hurt rather than just angry. I see you, Tyler. I've always seen you. No, you see your idea of me. You see the son who validates your success, who proves that you're good parents because you raised a high achiever. But you don't see the person who stays up at night wondering if any of this matters. The room fell silent except for the sound of Margaret's ragged breathing. Outside, Tyler could hear the murmur of reporters and the occasional car door slamming. Harold sank into his leather recliner, suddenly looking every one of his 52 years. So what now? The lawyer says we have options, but Tyler, you have to understand, there will be consequences either way. If we fight this, it goes to trial. If we don't, you have a criminal record. Maybe I should have a criminal record, Ty. Officer Martinez sat at the Whitmore's granite kitchen island, his laptop open and connected to their security system. The family clustered around him like spectators at an execution, though none of them knew yet who was about to die. The system shows motion activation at 3:47 a.m., Martinez said, clicking through the interface. Camera 7 has the best angle of the pool area. Tyler's legs felt like water. He gripped the back of a bar stool, knuckles white against the brushed steel. The spray paint stain on his finger seemed to burn. Excellent, Margaret said, leaning forward with predatory anticipation. I want to see this little vandal's face when we catch him. The screen flickered to life, showing the pool area in infrared. At first, there was nothing but the peaceful geometry of their backyard oasis, the pool's surface like black glass, the carefully positioned outdoor furniture casting angular shadows. Then a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. There. Harold pointed at the screen. There's the little bastard. The figure moved with purpose, not the hurried scramble of a nervous teenager but the deliberate steps of someone who belonged. Tyler watched himself on screen, remembering the strange calm that had settled over him in those pre-dawn hours. He'd felt like he was sleepwalking through someone else's dream. Can you enhance the image? Margaret asked. I want to see his face clearly for the lawsuit. Tyler's mouth went bone dry. On screen, his digital doppelganger was pulling a can of spray paint from his hoodie pocket. The infrared camera caught every detail, the way he shook the can, the test spray on the concrete, the careful positioning before the first letter. Hold on, Officer Martinez said, adjusting the playback settings. Let me switch to the color. Camera. The image quality is better. No, Tyler whispered, but the word came out as barely a breath. His parents didn't hear him. They were too focused on the screen, too hungry for justice to notice their son's growing panic. Margaret had her phone out, ready to record the vandal's face for social media shaming. The color footage was devastating in its clarity. Tyler watched himself work with the methodical precision of an artist, each letter carefully formed, each word properly spaced. But it was more than vandalism. It was a performance. He could see now what he'd missed in the moment, the way he'd looked directly at the camera after finishing Rich Pigs, as if he'd wanted to be caught. Jesus, Harold breathed. Look at how calculated this is. This wasn't some random act. This kid planned it. On screen, Tyler was adding the final touches to Eat the Wealthy. The camera caught his face in perfect profile as he stepped back to admire his work. There was no hiding behind shadows or hoodies now. The security lights illuminated every feature. Officer Martinez paused the playback, the image frozen on Tyler's face turned toward the camera. The silence in the kitchen stretched like a held breath. Margaret leaned closer to the screen, her expression shifting from vindictive satisfaction to confusion to something approaching horror. That's not. Oh my God, Harold whispered. Tyler closed his eyes, but he could still feel their stares burning into him. When he opened them again, 3 faces were turned toward him, his parents slack with shock, Officer Martinez's carefully neutral but watchful. Tyler. Margaret's voice cracked on his name. Tyler, what is this? He wanted to explain. Wanted to tell them about the years of watching them complain about property taxes while writing $1,000 checks to charity galas. About listening to them dismiss his friends from public school as those kids. About the suffocating weight of their expectations and the hollow ring of their values. Instead, he said nothing. This has to be a mistake, Harold said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe someone who looks like Tyler. Officer Martinez rewound the footage and played it again. This time, the evidence was even more damning. Tyler's face was clearly visible in multiple frames, and there was no mistaking the deliberate nature of his actions. The timestamp shows 3:47 to 4:23 a.m., Martinez said quietly. That's a 36-minute window. This wasn't impulsive, it was planned. Margaret was staring at Tyler like she'd never seen him before. You did this. You actually did this to our home. Mom, don't. Her voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. Don't you dare try to explain this away. I called the police on my own son. The weight of that statement settled over them. Margaret had spent the morning ranting to neighbors about vandals and demographics, had demanded justice and retribution, had painted herself as the victim of random teenage crime. Now she was face to face with the reality that the criminal was sleeping in the bedroom down the hall. Harold ran his hands through his silver hair. The neighbors. Jesus Christ, the neighbors saw the police cars. They'll want to know what happened. What happened, Tyler said, finding his voice at last, is that I told the truth about what we are. Margaret's face flushed red. What we are. We are your parents. We've given you everything. Everything I never asked for, Tyler shot back. Designer clothes I don't want. College choices I didn't make. A life that feels like wearing someone else's skin. You ungrateful little, Harold started, but Officer Martinez cleared his throat. Folks, I need to ask Tyler some questions. This is still a criminal matter. The word criminal hit the kitchen like a physical blow. Margaret sank onto a bar stool, her perfect posture finally cracking. Harold loosened his tie further, his boardroom composure evaporating. Officer Martinez turned to Tyler with professional courtesy that felt more dangerous than anger. Tyler, I need you to confirm, did you vandalize the pool area between approximately 3:45 and 4:30 a.m. this morning? Tyler looked at his parents, then back at the officer. The truth felt like stepping off a cliff. Yes. And you used spray paint to write messages on the pool area and surrounding surfaces? Yes. Margaret made a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. I can't believe this. I cannot believe this. Tyler, Officer Martinez continued, do you understand that vandalism is a crime, even if it's committed on your family's property? This caught Tyler off guard. But it's our house. Property damage is property damage, Martinez explained. The law doesn't make exceptions for family members. Technically, I could arrest you right now. The word arrest sent Margaret into overdrive. Arrest? No, absolutely not. This is a family matter now. We'll handle it internally. You called to report a crime. I have a confession and video evidence. The district attorney's office will expect me to file charges. Harold found his voice. Officer, surely there's some way to handle this without making it official. Tyler's a good kid. He's never been in trouble before. Tyler almost laughed at the irony. An hour ago, his parents had been demanding maximum prosecution for the vandal who defaced their property. Now they were trying to protect him from the consequences of his own actions. I want to press charges, Margaret said suddenly. Everyone turned to stare at her. Even Officer Martinez looked surprised. Margaret, Harold started, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Her voice was steady now, cold as winter steel. He destroyed our property. He humiliated our family. He made me call the police on my own son without knowing it. If he wants to act like a criminal, he can be treated like one. Tyler felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. He'd expected anger, disappointment, maybe grounding until graduation. He hadn't expected his mother to actually follow through with prosecution. Mom, please. Don't Mom please me. You made your choice when you picked up that spray paint can. You wanted to make a statement about what kind of people we are. Fine. Let's see what kind of person you are when you're explaining this to a judge. Harold grabbed Margaret's arm. You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. He's our son. Our son is a vandal and a liar. Margaret's voice carried 17 years of maternal disappointment compressed into a single devastating sentence. His been planning this, plotting against his own family. What else has he been lying about? The question hung in the air like smoke. Tyler thought about all the small deceptions that had led to this moment, the college applications he'd submitted without telling them, the girlfriend they'd never met, the late-night conversations about inequality and privilege that had planted the seeds of his rebellion. Officer Martinez checked his watch. I need to make a decision here. Tyler, you're a minor, so we'd need to contact juvenile authorities. Mrs. Whitmore, are you certain you want to pursue charges against your son? Margaret looked at Tyler, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Her perfect son, her Harvard-bound pride and joy, standing in their perfect kitchen with spray paint on his fingers and defiance in his eyes. "I'm certain," she said. Tyler felt something break inside him, something that couldn't be repaired with family therapy or grounding or college fund threats. His mother had just chosen her pool over her son. "Actually," Tyler said, his voice stronger than he felt, "I'm not sorry." The kitchen fell silent. "I'm not sorry I did it, and I'm not sorry you found out. You want to know what kind of person I am? I'm the kind of person who's tired of pretending that being rich makes us good people. I'm tired of watching you donate to charity while complaining about poor kids in our school district. I'm tired of being your perfect little accessory." Margaret's face had gone white. "Tyler, I spray paint." 3 weeks later, Tyler sat in the county courthouse wearing a suit his mother had bought specifically for his sentencing hearing. The irony wasn't lost on him. Even facing criminal charges, the Whitmores maintained their image of respectability. The suit probably cost more than most of the other defendants' families made in a month. The media attention had died down to a manageable simmer, but the damage to the family's reputation was irreversible. Harold had been quietly asked to step back from his position on the hospital board. Margaret had resigned from the country club's membership committee after several uncomfortable conversations with other board members. Their social circle had contracted like a wound closing, leaving them isolated in their perfect house with their perfect pool, now restored to its original pristine condition at a cost of $8,000. Whitmore case, docket number JV 2024-0847, the bailiff called. Tyler stood, his legs unsteady. 3 weeks of waiting had given him plenty of time to think about consequences, but the reality of facing a judge still made his mouth go dry. Behind him, he could feel his parents' presence like heat from a fire. Margaret rigid with controlled panic, Harold radiating the kind of nervous energy that came from losing control of a situation he couldn't buy his way out of. Judge Patricia Morales looked exactly like what Tyler had expected from a juvenile court judge. Tired, skeptical, and completely immune to the kind of charm that worked in boardrooms and country clubs. She'd been processing troubled teenagers for 23 years, and her eyes suggested she'd seen every possible variation of family dysfunction. "Tyler Whitmore," she said, consulting her notes. "Vandalism, destruction of property, value exceeding $5,000. How do you plead?" Tyler's lawyer, Jonathan Rivers, stood beside him. Rivers was everything Harold had promised: expensive, well-connected, and very good at making problems disappear. He'd spent the past 3 weeks crafting a narrative of teenage rebellion and family dysfunction that would minimize Tyler's culpability. "Your Honor," Rivers began, "my client pleads guilty to the charge of vandalism, but we respectfully request the court consider the unique circumstances of this case. Tyler is a first-time offender with excellent grades and no prior history of behavioral problems. This incident represents an isolated moment of poor judgment rather than a pattern of criminal behavior." Judge Morales looked unimpressed. "Mr. Rivers, your client spray-painted rich pigs on his family's property and then allowed his mother to call the police, knowing she would be reporting her own son as the perpetrator. That suggests a level of premeditation that goes beyond poor judgment." Tyler felt a flash of irritation. Everyone kept talking about him like he wasn't in the room, reducing his actions to legal categories and psychiatric explanations. But before Rivers could respond, Tyler stepped forward. "Your Honor, can I say something?" Rivers grabbed his arm. "Tyler, we discussed this. I want to speak for myself." Tyler looked directly at Judge Morales. "Everyone keeps trying to explain what I did, but nobody's asking why I did it." The judge raised an eyebrow. In 23 years, she'd rarely had a juvenile defendant interrupt his own attorney to make unsolicited statements. "Mr. Whitmore, you have the right to address the court, but I advise you to think carefully about what you're going to say." Tyler could feel his parents' panic radiating behind him like heat waves. This wasn't part of Rivers' carefully orchestrated plan. This was Tyler going off script again, just like the night he'd picked up the spray paint can. "I vandalized my family's pool because it was the only way to make them see what we'd become," Tyler said. "We live in a house that costs more than most people make in 5 years, and my parents complain about property taxes that fund public schools. They write checks to charity so they can feel good about themselves, but they've never actually talked to a poor person unless they were serving them food or cleaning their house." "Tyler," Margaret whispered behind him, but he didn't turn around. I spray-painted rich pigs because that's what we are. Not because we have money, but because we've forgotten what it's like to be human. My mother pressed charges against her own son because she cared more about her property than her family. That's what money does to people. It makes them forget what actually matters. Judge Morales leaned forward. Mr. Whitmore, do you understand that you're here because you committed a crime? This isn't a therapy session or a family intervention. This is a courtroom. I understand that, Your Honor. But I think the crime isn't the spray paint. The crime is building a life so disconnected from reality that your own son has to vandalize your property to get your attention. The courtroom fell silent. Tyler could hear his mother's sharp intake of breath, could feel River's horror at his client's complete abandonment of legal strategy. Judge Morales studied Tyler with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for particularly complex cases. Mr. Whitmore, you've just confessed to the crime in question and provided detailed reasoning for your actions. You understand that this makes it impossible for your attorney to argue for reduced charges. Yes, Your Honor. And you're willing to accept full responsibility for your actions, including the financial cost of repairs and the emotional impact on your family. Tyler thought about the past 3 weeks, the reporters, the whispered conversations at school, the way his parents looked at him like he was a stranger living in their house. He thought about the other kids in juvenile detention, most of whom were there for crimes of survival rather than rebellion. Yes, Your Honor, but I want my community service to be somewhere that matters. Not picking up trash on the highway or filing papers in some office. I want to work with people who actually need help. Judge Morales made a note on her papers. Mr. Whitmore, I'm going to sentence you to 6 months of supervised probation, 100 hours of community service, and full restitution for damages. But I'm also going to do something unusual. She looked directly at Margaret and Harold. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, would you please stand? Tyler's parents rose uncertainly, clearly unprepared to be part of the proceedings. In my 23 years on this bench, Judge Morales continued, I've seen a lot of family dysfunction. I've seen parents who abandon their children, parents who abuse their children, parents who fail their children in countless ways. But I've rarely seen parents who have their child arrested for trying to communicate with them. Margaret's face flushed red. Your Honor, Tyler destroyed our property. Mrs. Whitmore, your son spray-painted your pool. He didn't burn down your house or sell drugs or hurt anyone. He wrote words that made you uncomfortable, and your response was to have him arrested. The judge's voice carried the weight of 2 decades of seeing families torn apart by circumstances far more serious than graffiti. Tyler, your community service will be served at the Riverside Community Center, working with at-risk youth and families experiencing homelessness. Maybe spending time with people who have real problems will give you perspective on your own. She turned back to Tyler's parents. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I'm ordering family counseling as part of your son's probation. Not because it's standard practice, but because you clearly need to learn how to communicate with each other before this family destroys itself completely. Margaret started to object, but Judge Morales held up a hand. This is not a suggestion. If Tyler violates any terms of his probation, including the family counseling requirement, he'll serve 30 days in juvenile detention. But Mrs. Whitmore, if you or your husband fail to participate in counseling, Tyler will be removed from your home and placed in foster care until he turns 18. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Foster care was the nuclear option, the thing that happened to other people's children, not to families like the Whitmores. Your Honor, Harold found his voice. Surely that's excessive. Mr. Whitmore, your son committed a crime to get your attention. That suggests a level of desperation that concerns me. Either you learn to be a family, or the state will find Tyler a better one. Tyler felt something shift inside him, not satisfaction exactly, but a sense that justice was more complicated than he'd imagined. He'd wanted his parents to face consequences for their blindness, but he hadn't expected those consequences to be mandatory therapy sessions. Do you understand the terms of your probation, Mr. Whitmore? Judge Morales asked. Yes, Your Honor. And do you understand that this is your one chance? If you appear before me again on any charge, you'll be tried as an adult. I understand. Judge Morales brought down her gavel with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the courthouse. Court is adjourned. As they filed out of the courtroom, Tyler caught his reflection in the polished courthouse windows. He looked different somehow, older, maybe, or just more real? The boy who had spray-painted the pool in a moment of desperate authenticity was gone. In his place was someone who had faced consequences and survived them. Outside, the autumn air was crisp with the promise of winter. The reporters who had camped outside their house for weeks were nowhere to be seen. The story had run its course, replaced by fresher scandals and more compelling tragedies. Margaret walked beside Tyler in silence, her expensive heels clicking against the courthouse steps. Harold brought up the rear, probably already thinking about how to 6 months later, Tyler stood at the edge of the Riverside Community Center's outdoor basketball court, watching 8-year-old Marcus attempt a free throw for the dozenth time. The ball arced through the afternoon air and bounced off the rim. Again, but Marcus retrieved it with the kind of determined optimism that Tyler had forgotten existed in the world. "Almost had it that time," Tyler called out. "Remember what I said about your follow-through?" Marcus nodded seriously and lined up for another shot. He was one of Tyler's regulars, a kid whose mother worked 3 jobs to keep them housed in a studio apartment 6 blocks from the community center. Marcus had never seen an infinity pool, had never complained about property taxes, had never taken a single meal for granted. But he had something Tyler was still learning to recognize, an unshakable sense of joy in small victories. The shot went in this time, nothing but net. Marcus pumped his fist and grinned at Tyler with gap-toothed triumph. "Did you see that? Did you see that shot?" "I saw it," Tyler said, and meant it. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have noticed. 6 months ago, he would have been thinking about college applications or his parents' expectations or the crushing weight of his own privilege. Now, Marcus's basketball shots felt more important than most of the things that used to fill his days. Tyler's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Therapy at 4. Don't be late." He almost smiled. Margaret's texts had evolved over the past 6 months from clipped commands to something approaching normal maternal concern. It was progress, even if it sometimes felt glacially slow. "I got to go, Marcus," Tyler called. "Same time tomorrow." "You bet." Marcus was already dribbling toward a group of other kids, probably to demonstrate his newfound free throw prowess. The drive from the community center to Dr. Sarah Chen's office took Tyler through 3 distinct economic zones of the city. He'd made this journey twice a week for 6 months now, and the transitions had become a kind of anthropological study. From the struggling neighborhoods around Riverside to the comfortable middle-class areas near the university to the manicured affluence of the professional district where Dr. Chen had her practice. Dr. Chen specialized in family therapy, particularly families dealing with what she called wealth trauma, the peculiar psychological damage that came from having too much money rather than too little. Tyler had been skeptical at first, resistant to the idea that privilege could be traumatic. But 6 months of sessions had taught him that money could be just as destructive as poverty, just in different ways. He arrived at the office to find his parents already there, sitting in the waiting room with the careful distance they'd maintained for months. Harold looked up from his phone and nodded. Margaret managed a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They were trying, all of them, but healing turned out to be much harder work than vandalism. "The Whitmore family," Dr. Chen called from her office doorway. She was younger than Tyler had expected when they'd started therapy, maybe 40, with kind eyes and the kind of calm presence that made confession feel safer than silence. They filed into the familiar office and took their usual seats. Tyler on the couch, his parents in chairs positioned to form a rough triangle. For the first few sessions, the arrangement had felt like a standoff. Now it just felt like work. "How was everyone's week?" Dr. Chen asked, settling into her own chair with a notepad that she rarely used but somehow made everyone feel heard. "Tyler's been putting in extra hours at the community center," Margaret said. It was the kind of statement that 6 months ago would have been delivered as an accusation. "Look how he's avoiding us. Look how he's punishing us." Now it sounded almost like pride. "The kids need consistency," Tyler said. "Some of them don't have anywhere else to go after school." Harold cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about what Tyler said last week, about the charity donations." This was new territory. Harold rarely brought up previous sessions unprompted. "What specifically?" Dr. Chen asked. "He said we write checks to feel good about ourselves, but we never actually engage with the problems we are supposedly solving." Harold's voice carried the careful precision of someone who'd been thinking about uncomfortable truths. "I looked into it. The children's hospital wing we funded? It's beautiful. State of the art. But the public clinic 3 miles away is understaffed and underfunded. Margaret shifted in her chair. Harold, we can't solve every problem. That's not what I'm saying. Harold turned to face her directly, something Dr. Chen had been encouraging for months. I'm saying Tyler was right. We were donating to causes that made us feel generous without actually changing anything meaningful. We were buying indulgences. Tyler felt something loosen in his chest. It wasn't vindication exactly. 6 months of therapy had taught him that being right wasn't the same as being helpful. But it was acknowledgement, the thing he'd been desperately seeking that night with. The spray paint can. How does it feel to hear your father say that, Tyler? Dr. Chen asked. Complicated, Tyler said honestly. Good, but also, scary? Like, if you guys can change your minds about charity, what else might change? It was a question that had been haunting their family sessions. Change was what Tyler had demanded, but change was also terrifying because it meant nothing was permanent, nothing was guaranteed. If his parents could acknowledge their blind spots, they could also decide he wasn't worth the effort of understanding. Margaret spoke quietly. I've been volunteering at the women's shelter. Not writing checks, actually volunteering. Serving meals, helping with intake interviews. This was news to Tyler. His mother had mentioned exploring volunteer opportunities, but had been vague about the details. How has that been? Dr. Chen asked. Humbling. Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. There was a woman last week, about my age, with 2 kids. Her husband had been abusing her for years, but she couldn't leave because she had nowhere to go. No savings, no family support, no way to support herself and the children. Margaret looked directly at Tyler for the first time in the session. She reminded me of myself at that age, before your father's business took off, and I realized that the difference between her life and mine wasn't virtue or hard work or good choices. It was luck. Timing. Your father's investments paying off instead of failing. Tyler felt tears prick at his eyes. This was the conversation he'd been trying to start for years, the acknowledgement that their comfortable life was built as much on fortune as effort. It made me think about what you spray painted on the pool, Margaret continued. You called us rich pigs, and I was so angry because I thought you were calling us evil. But you weren't, were you? You were calling us willfully blind. I was. Angry, Tyler said. But yeah, mostly I was frustrated that you couldn't see what I was seeing. That we live in this bubble where money solves everything, and we'd forgotten what it was like to have real problems. Harold leaned forward. So, what do we do now? How do we be better? It was the question they'd been building toward for 6 months. Not how to go back to the way things were, but how to move forward as different people. Dr. Chen looked around the triangle of chairs. What do you think, Tyler? You started this conversation. How would you like to see it continue? Tyler thought. About Marcus and his free throws, about the woman at the shelter who reminded Margaret of herself, about the public clinic that needed funding more than the hospital wing that would carry their family name. I want us to be a family that actually knows each other, he said finally. Not the version of each other we think we are supposed to be, but who we actually are. And I want us to use what we have in ways that matter. That sounds like a good start, Dr. Chen said. But it also sounds like ongoing work, not a destination. Margaret reached over and took Tyler's hand, the first physical contact they'd had in months that wasn't awkward or forced. I'm willing to do the work if you are. Harold nodded. All of us. Together. Tyler squeezed his mother's hand and felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope that was bigger than his own pain, broader than his own anger. The pool at home was perfect again, its surface reflecting nothing but sky. But the family. Sitting in Dr. Chen's office was something entirely new, messier, more honest, more real. As they left the therapy session, Tyler's phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. Practiced free throws after you left. Made 7 out of 10. Tyler showed the message to his parents. Margaret smiled, a real smile this time, reaching all the way to her eyes. Tell him that's incredible, she said. And ask if he'd like to come over for dinner sometime. I'd like to meet this kid who's been teaching my son about joy. Tyler stared at his mother, surprised by the invitation but even more surprised by her recognition that Marcus had been teaching him something valuable. 6 months ago, Margaret would have seen Marcus as a charity case. Now she saw him as Tyler's teacher. He'd love that, Tyler said. But fair warning, he'll probably want to see the pool. Harold laughed, the first genuine laugh Tyler had. Heard from his father in months. Then we better make sure the spray paint is locked up. It was a joke, but it was also an acknowledgement. The pool would always be part of their story now, the place where their family had broken apart so it could come back together as something more honest. Tyler's vandalism had been destructive, but true.